The auctioneer's gavel cracked like a gunshot across the platform, and Clara Reed forced herself to stand taller. 6 pairs of small hands clutched at her worn skirts, while her late husband's brother called out numbers like she was livestock. The crowd's laughter cut deeper than any knife. Mothers shielding their daughters' eyes, men making obscene gestures, children pointing and whispering. Her oldest boy, Thomas, only 9 years old, stepped in front of his siblings with fists clenched so tight his knuckles went white. This wasn't just an auction. This was the deliberate destruction of everything she had left. Welcome to a story of dignity reclaimed against impossible odds. Stay with us until the very end to see how one woman's courage changed everything. If this story moves you, hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Clara's journey reaches across the world. The morning had started with deception. Clara Reed woke to find her children already dressed, their few belongings packed into flour sacks by hands that weren't hers. Her brother-in-law, Vernon Reed, stood in the doorway of the shanty cabin she'd called home for the past 3 months, since the fever took her husband and left her with 6 children and debts she couldn't possibly pay. "Get yourself presentable," Vernon said, not meeting her eyes. "We're going into town." She'd believed him when he said there was work, laundry perhaps, or cooking for the hotel. Something to help her earn passage further west, away from these mountains and the memories that haunted every shadow. She'd braided her dark hair with careful fingers, put on her only decent dress, faded blue calico that had seen better years, and gathered her children like a mother hen collecting chicks. Thomas, 9 years old with his father's serious eyes. Margaret, 7, already trying to mother the younger ones. The twins, Samuel and Sarah, barely 5. Little Benjamin, 3, who still asked for his papa every night. And baby Ruthie, just 14 months, who rode on Clara's hip and pulled at her hair with fat, curious fingers. They walked into Timber Ridge under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Clara noticed the stares immediately, women turning away, men's gazes lingering too long. The children sensed it too, pressing closer to her skirts as Vernon led them not toward the hotel or the laundry, but toward the town square, where a rough wooden platform had been erected overnight. The sick understanding came slowly, then all at once. "Vernon," her voice cracked, "what is this?" "Business," he said flatly. "You got 6 mouths to feed and no way to feed them. This way, everybody gets what they need." "You can't, I'm not—" But his hand was already on her arm, pulling her toward the platform steps. The children cried out, reaching for her, and Vernon's wife, that pinch-faced woman who'd made Clara's mourning period a living hell, grabbed Thomas by the collar. "You be still now," she hissed at the boy. "Your mama's getting what she deserves for thinking she could keep all of you without a man." Thomas's face went red, but he didn't struggle. Instead, he gathered his siblings close, whispering something Clara couldn't hear. Margaret wrapped her arms around the twins. Even little Benjamin seemed to understand that something terrible was happening. The auctioneer was a thin man with a voice like gravel and whiskey. He looked at Clara with something that might have been pity, then spat tobacco juice off the side of the platform. "Gentlemen," he called out, and the crowd, Clara couldn't believe how many had gathered, drawn by gossip and spectacle, pressed closer. "We have here Mrs. Clara Reed, widow of the late Jacob Reed. 28 years of age, healthy, good teeth, knows her way around a kitchen and a washboard." Clara's ears rang. This couldn't be happening. Not in 1882, not in Wyoming territory where laws existed, where women had rights. "Strong back," the auctioneer continued, walking around her like she was a horse at auction. 6 children, which some might see as a burden, but I say shows good breeding capacity. Starting bid, $50. The crowd erupted in laughter. $50 for a used-up widow and 6 brats? Someone shouted. "I wouldn't pay 5. She looks like she'd break under a plow. Them children probably eat more than they're worth." Clara's vision blurred. She would not cry, would not give them the satisfaction. She lifted her chin and stared straight ahead, past the leering faces and pointing fingers, to where her children huddled together like refugees from a storm. Thomas met her eyes. In that 9-year-old face, she saw a rage and determination that broke her heart. He was too young to carry such weight, but here they were. $20, a voice called. It belonged to Sam Hutchins, the mill owner, whose wife had died the previous winter. He was 60 if he was a day, with hands like ham hocks and a reputation for meanness. $25, countered another man. But I only want the woman. Kids can go to the orphanage. Clara's hands shook. She clasped them together, pressing so hard her bones ached. 30, Hutchins said. I'll take the boys, old enough to work. The girls and the baby can go elsewhere. You can't separate them. The words tore from Clara's throat before she could stop them. They're children, not cattle. You're in no position to make demands, girl, Vernon called from below. Should have thought of that before you refused every decent proposal you got after Jacob died. Decent. The word was a slap. The proposals had been from men who saw her grief as opportunity, her children as inconvenience. Men who'd made it clear that her babies would be sent away, scattered to the winds, while she warmed their beds and cooked their meals. She'd refused them all. And now Vernon had found another way to profit from her situation. 35. A younger man this time, railroad worker by the look of him. I'll take the woman and the oldest girl. She's pretty enough. Be prettier in a few years. The crowd's laughter had an ugly edge now. Clara's stomach turned. She looked frantically around the square, searching for help, for anyone who might stop this madness. The sheriff stood at the edge of the crowd, arms crossed, watching. He caught her eye and looked away. No help was coming. $40, Hutchins said. Final offer. Woman and boys, that's generous considering. The auctioneer raised his gavel. $40 going once. Clara's knees threatened to buckle. This was it. She would be sold to a man she despised. Her daughters scattered to fates she couldn't protect them from. Her sons worked like animals in Hutchins' mill where children lost fingers and worse. Going twice, a hand rose at the back of the crowd. The auctioneer paused, squinting. We got another bid? The crowd parted like water, and a man walked forward. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing dusty range clothes and a hat pulled low. He didn't hurry, didn't seem fazed by the eyes tracking his movement. When he reached the front of the platform, he looked up at Clara. His eyes were gray, like winter sky. His face was weathered, sun-lined, with a beard that needed trimming. He wasn't young, 40, maybe older, but he moved with the easy strength of a man who worked hard and asked nothing from anyone. $100, he said quietly. For all of them. The crowd went silent. Vernon pushed forward, eyes gleaming with greed. You want the whole lot? Woman and all 6 kids? The man's gaze didn't leave Clara's face. That's what I said. $100 is a lot of money, friend, the auctioneer said carefully. You sure about this? I don't say things I'm not sure about. Clara couldn't breathe. She searched his face for the cruelty she'd learned to recognize, the predatory gleam that men got when they saw vulnerability. But his expression was unreadable, closed off. He wasn't looking at her like the others had, like something to be used. He was looking at her like she wasn't sure, like she was a problem he could solve, maybe. An equation that needed balancing. Well then, the auctioneer grinned, sensing the drama of it all. We have a bid of $100 for the widow Reed and her 6 children. Going once, going twice. Wait, Hutchins sputtered. I didn't know we could bid on all of them. $120. The stranger's jaw tightened. $150. $160. $200. $2. The stranger's voice never rose, never changed pitch. He pulled a leather pouch from his coat and dropped it on the platform with a heavy thunk. Cash. Right now. And we're done. The auctioneer grabbed the pouch, weighed it in his hand, then opened it to check the contents. His eyes widened. Well, I'll be damned. 200 in gold coin. Vernon climbed onto the platform, reaching for the pouch. Sold. She's all yours, mister. Kids, too. You got yourself a real bargain. The stranger's eyes cut to Vernon with such cold contempt that Clara's brother-in-law actually took a step back. I don't do business with men who sell their own blood. Give her belongings and the children, then get out of my sight. His voice was quiet, but something in it made Vernon's wife scurry to collect the children's flour sacks. Thomas broke free and ran to the platform, scrambling up to stand beside Clara. Margaret followed, and then the twins and Benjamin with baby Ruthie in his small arms. They clustered around Clara, and she wrapped her arms around as many as she could reach, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. The stranger looked at them, really looked, his gaze traveling over each child's face, noting the fear, the exhaustion, the fierce protectiveness in Thomas's stance. Wagons this way, he said finally, and turned to walk away. Clara didn't move. Her children pressed against her, and she couldn't make her feet take a step toward this unknown man who just bought them like property. He stopped, glanced back. For the first time, something that might have been understanding flickered across his face. Name's Caleb Ward. I have a ranch 15 miles north of here. You'll have a roof, food, and nobody will bother you. He paused. You can walk away right now if you want. I won't stop you. But if you're coming, we need to leave before dark. Why? Clara's voice came out hoarse. Why would you do this? Caleb Ward looked at her children again, and something painful crossed his face, there and gone so fast she almost missed it. Because nobody should be sold on a platform like livestock, he said simply, and because kids deserve better than what this town was offering. He walked away, and after a long moment, Clara felt Thomas tug at her hand. Mama? His voice was small, young, stripped of the bravado he'd tried to show. What do we do? She looked around the square, at the crowd dispersing, disappointed the show was over. At Vernon, counting gold coins with greedy fingers. At the sheriff, still doing nothing. At the platform she stood on, where she'd been degraded and humiliated and nearly torn from her children. Then she looked at the broad-shouldered figure walking toward a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 horses, his steps steady and sure. We go, she said quietly. We go, and we see what happens. The walk to the wagon felt like miles, though it was only yards. People stared, whispered. Clara held her head high, one hand gripping Thomas's shoulder, the other supporting Ruthie on her hip. Margaret herded the twins, and Benjamin clutched his sister's skirt. Caleb Ward was checking the wagon when they arrived. It was well made, clean, with a canvas cover that would provide shade from the afternoon sun. He loaded their meager belongings without comment, then turned to help Clara up. She hesitated before taking his offered hand. His palm was calloused, warm, and he helped her into the wagon seat with the same impersonal efficiency he'd shown everything else. The children scrambled into the back, and Clara heard them settling onto blankets that smelled of sage and clean cotton. Caleb climbed up beside her, took the reins, and clicked his tongue at the horses. The wagon lurched forward, and Timber Ridge began to fall away behind them. They rode in silence for the first mile. Clara kept sneaking glances at the man beside her, trying to understand what she'd just agreed to. His profile was stern, the lines around his eyes deep. A scar cut through his left eyebrow. His hands on the reins were steady, competent. Mr. Ward, she began. Caleb. Mr. Ward, she repeated firmly, needing the distance that formality provided. I need to understand what you expect from this arrangement. He didn't look at her. Expect? You paid $200 for me and my children. That's more than most men pay for a breeding horse. So what do you want in return? Now he did glance at her, and she saw surprise in those gray eyes. I want you and those kids to have a safe place to sleep and enough to eat. That's all. That's not all. No man spends that kind of money without wanting something. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working. The wagon creaked and swayed over the rutted road. Finally he spoke. I had a wife once, and a daughter. They died of scarlet fever 8 years back. His voice was flat, emotionless. The ranch has been empty since. I work it alone, keep to myself. But when I came into town for supplies today and saw what was happening in that square, he paused. I saw my Emma's face in every one of those children, saw my Sarah in you, standing there trying to be brave while the world tore you apart. Clara's throat tightened. I'm sorry for your loss. Don't be. It was a long time ago. He turned the wagon onto a narrower track, heading into hills covered with pine and aspen. Here's how this works. You and the kids take the main house. It's got 3 bedrooms, a kitchen, a good stove. I'll bunk in the barn. There's a room there I fixed up for hired hands, though I haven't hired any in years. You're giving us your house? It's just been me. You've got 6 children who need space and comfort. Makes sense. Mr. Ward, Caleb, he said again, more firmly. If we're going to live on the same land, you might as well use my Christian name. Caleb, then. She folded her hands in her lap, trying to find the right words. This is very generous, but I can't accept charity. I can work, I can cook, clean, help with livestock, whatever needs doing. I'm not asking you to be my servant. Then what am I? He looked at her directly then, and she saw something raw in his expression. You're a woman who deserves the chance to raise her children in peace. That's what you are. Nothing more, nothing less. The sincerity in his voice left her speechless. She turned to look back at her children, who were peeking out from under the wagon cover, watching the landscape change from dusty plains to green foothills. The oldest is Thomas, she said quietly. He's 9. Then Margaret, she's 7. The twins are Samuel and Sarah. They just turned 5. Benjamin is 3. And the baby is Ruthie. Good names, Caleb nodded. They look like they've had a hard go of it. Their father died 4 months ago. Fever. Clara's voice threatened to break. We had a small place, but there were debts. Vernon took everything, said he'd help us get back on our feet if we came to live with him and his wife. She laughed bitterly. Should have known better. Some people see tragedy as opportunity. You didn't. No, Caleb said simply. I didn't. They rode for another hour, climbing higher into the mountains. The air grew cooler, pine-scented. Clara saw deer grazing in a meadow and a hawk circling overhead. The children had grown quiet, exhausted by fear and uncertainty. When they crested a ridge, Caleb pulled the horses to a stop. There, he said, pointing. Clara looked down into a valley cradled between mountains. A ranch house sat near a creek, solid and well-built, with a wide porch and river stone chimney. There was a large barn, a chicken coop, corrals with good fencing. Fields stretched out beyond, and she could see cattle grazing in the distance. It was beautiful. It was also completely isolated. Nearest neighbor is 8 miles east, Caleb said, as if reading her thoughts. Town is 15 miles south. It's quiet. Some would say too quiet. It's perfect, Thomas said from behind them, his voice filled with wonder. Mama, look how much space there is. The wagon descended into the valley, and as they drew closer, Clara could see that the ranch was well maintained despite Caleb living alone. The fences were mended, the barn roof was sound, the house windows were clean. Caleb pulled the wagon up to the porch and set the brake. Before he could move to help, Thomas had jumped down and was lifting his siblings out one by one with the careful precision of a boy who'd grown up too fast. Clara climbed down on her own, not wanting to feel the warmth of Caleb's hand again, until she understood what all of this meant. She stood in the yard holding Ruthie, surrounded by her children, looking at a house that seemed too good to be true. Come on, Caleb said, carrying their bags up the porch steps. I'll show you inside. The house smelled like wood smoke and leather, and something indefinably masculine. Not unpleasant, just lonely. The main room was large, with a stone fireplace that dominated one wall. The furniture was simple but well made. A table that could seat 8 sturdy chairs, a rocking chair by the hearth. Everything was clean but sparse, like a house waiting for life to return to it. Kitchen's through there, Caleb gestured. Pantry's stocked. Well pump is just outside the back door. Bedrooms are upstairs. There's 3 of them. You'll have to figure out sleeping arrangements. Margaret was already exploring, her eyes wide. The twins followed her like ducklings. Thomas stood close to Clara, still wary, still ready to protect. Caleb, Clara said carefully, this is too much. It's just a house. It's a home, and you're giving it to strangers. He set their bags down and looked at her steadily. Then I guess we'd better stop being strangers. You want coffee? Despite everything, Clara almost smiled. Coffee would be good? He moved to the kitchen with the efficiency of a man who'd cooked for himself for years. Clara heard him working the pump, striking a match for the stove. She set Ruthie down to toddle after her siblings and sank into one of the chairs at the table, suddenly exhausted. Thomas came to stand beside her. Mama, is this real? She pulled him close, pressing a kiss to his hair. I think so, baby. I think so. He seems okay, Mr. Ward, I mean. Thomas's voice was uncertain. He doesn't look at you the way those other men did. Clara's heart broke a little more. 9 years old, and he'd learned to recognize predators. No, he doesn't. Caleb returned with 2 cups of coffee, steam rising in the cool air. He set one in front of Clara and took the other to the window, looking out at his land. Ground rules, he said without preamble. You and the kids have free run of the house and the areas around it. I'll show Thomas where not to go. There's a ravine on the north side that's dangerous, and the bulls in the far pasture can be mean. Kitchen is yours to manage however you like. I usually eat simple: beans, bacon, bread. If you want to cook different, that's fine. We'll earn our keep, Clara said firmly. I won't take charity. Not asking you to. Caleb turned to face her. If you want to help, there's plenty needs doing. Gardens gone to weeds, chickens need tending, house could use a woman's touch. But that's your choice, not a requirement. And what about you? Where will you be? Working the ranch, up before dawn, usually don't come in until after dark. I'll take meals in the barn. You'll do no such thing, Clara said before she could stop herself. If we're living under your roof, you'll eat at your own table. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. Yes, ma'am. They stared at each other, and Clara felt the strangeness of the situation settle over her like a blanket. This man was a stranger. She was in his house, with her children, miles from anywhere. She should be terrified. But somehow she wasn't. Mr. Ward, Caleb, I need to know one thing, she said quietly, and I need you to be honest with me. Ask. Why did you really do this? The truth. He took a long drink of coffee, his eyes distant. When he spoke, his voice was rough with old grief. Because 8 years ago, I watched my wife and daughter die in this house, and I couldn't do a damn thing to stop it. Couldn't save them, couldn't help them, couldn't even ease their pain at the end. He set the cup down carefully, like it might break. Today, in that town square, I could do something. I could stop something terrible from happening. And maybe that doesn't balance the scales. Maybe it doesn't mean anything in the grand scheme. But I couldn't walk away. Clara's eyes burned. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for seeing us. For caring when no one else would. Don't thank me yet. You might hate it here. Winters are hard. Isolation is harder. You might decide town was better after all. No. The word came out fierce, certain. Whatever this is, wherever it leads, it's better than what we escaped. Upstairs, she heard Margaret's delighted laugh as she discovered something in one of the bedrooms. The twins were chattering, their voices light for the first time in months. Even Thomas had relaxed slightly, his shoulders not quite so rigid. Caleb heard it too. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. They're good kids. They've been through hell, but they're still good. They are, Clara agreed, and they deserve a chance to be children again, to play and laugh and not be afraid. Then that's what we'll give them. The word we hung in the air between them, a promise, an alliance, the beginning of something neither of them could quite name yet. As the sun began to set over the mountains, painting the valley in shades of gold and amber, Clara Reed stood at the window of a stranger's house and felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. It was fragile, uncertain, as delicate as morning frost, but it was there, warming the cold places in her chest where fear had lived for so long. Behind her, Caleb cleared his throat. I'll get your things settled upstairs. Then I'll be in the barn if you need anything. There's bread and butter in the pantry, eggs from this morning. Make yourselves at home. He moved past her, carrying their meager belongings with the same quiet efficiency he brought to everything. At the stairs, he paused. Clara? It was the first time he'd used her name. It sounded strange in his deep voice, careful, like he was testing how it felt. Yes? Welcome home. Then he was gone, climbing the stairs, and Clara was left alone with those two words echoing in her mind. Home. She closed her eyes and let herself believe it might be possible. The first morning arrived with bird song and the smell of coffee drifting up from the kitchen below. Clara woke disoriented, wrapped in a quilt she didn't recognize, in a bed softer than any she'd slept in for years. Ruthie was curled against her side, thumb in mouth, dark lashes resting on round cheeks. Through the window, dawn painted the mountains in shades of rose and gold. For a moment, Clara let herself simply breathe. No one was yelling at her to get up. No one was criticizing how she dressed her children or rationed the food. The silence was so complete it almost frightened her. Then she heard the creak of floorboards downstairs and remembered where she was. She dressed quickly in the dim light, braiding her hair with practiced fingers. Ruthie stirred but didn't wake. Clara slipped from the room, checking on the other children as she passed. Margaret and the twins were tangled together in one bed, peaceful. Thomas and Benjamin shared another room, both still deep in sleep. The house felt different in the early light, lived in, almost welcoming. Someone had banked the fire in the hearth before bed, and coals still glowed red beneath the ash. Clara made her way to the kitchen and stopped in the doorway. Caleb Ward stood at the stove, his back to her, pouring coffee into a tin cup. He was already dressed for work, worn denims, a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, boots that had seen hard miles. His hair was damp, like he'd washed at the pump outside. "Morning," he said without turning around. "Coffee's hot." Clara wondered how he'd heard her. She'd been quiet as a mouse. "Thank you." He gestured to the table where he'd set out bread, butter, and a jar of honey. "Thought the kids might be hungry when they wake. There's oatmeal if you want something hot." "You didn't have to. I was up anyway." He finally turned to look at her, and Clara was struck again by those gray eyes, so guarded and distant. "I'm heading out to check fences in the north pasture. Should be back by midday. There's a bell on the porch if you need anything. Ring it, and I'll hear." "A bell?" "Sarah used to ring it when lunch was ready. Sound carries in the valley." Something flickered across his face at the mention of his late wife's name, there and gone like a shadow. "Anyway, help yourself to whatever you need." He set his empty cup in the basin and headed for the door, grabbing a worn hat from a peg. Clara followed him onto the porch, hugging herself against the morning chill. "Caleb, wait." He paused on the steps, one hand on the railing. "I don't know how to do this," Clara said quietly. "I don't know what you expect, what the rules are, where the boundaries lie. I've never been in a situation like this before." He was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the valley where mist still clung to the creek. "Neither have I. I guess we figure it out as we go. That's not much of a plan. It's the only one I've got." He settled his hat lower on his brow. "Look, Clara, you're safe here. Your children are safe here. Beyond that, I'm not asking for anything. You want to cook and clean? Fine. You want to keep to yourself and just exist for a while? That's fine too. There's no debt between us except basic human decency." "There's always a debt. Always something owed." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Maybe in the world you came from, not here." He started down the steps, then stopped again. "My Sarah used to say the best way to heal a wound is to let it breathe and give it time. Same goes for people, I reckon." He walked away before Clara could respond, his long strides carrying him toward the barn. She watched him saddle a dark bay horse with efficient movements, mount up, and ride out toward the northern hills without looking back. Clara stood on that porch until the cold drove her inside, trying to reconcile the man who'd bought her off an auction block with the one who talked about wounds and healing. The children woke gradually, creeping downstairs with wide eyes and cautious steps like they expected the dream to shatter. Clara fed them bread and honey, watching color return to their cheeks as they ate without anyone scolding them for taking too much. "Mama, can we go outside?" Margaret asked, pressing her nose to the window. "Can we explore?" Clara thought of Caleb's warnings about the ravine and the bulls. "Stay close to the house. Thomas, you're in charge. No one goes near the barn or the pastures without asking first." The children scattered like dandelion seeds, their laughter spilling out into the morning air. Clara watched them through the window, Thomas showing Benjamin how to skip stones in the creek, Margaret helping the twins catch grasshoppers in the tall grass. Even baby Ruthie toddled around the porch, pointing at chickens that scratched in the yard. For the first time in months, they looked like children instead of refugees. Clara turned to survey the kitchen. It was functional but sparse. Clean dishes stacked neatly, a pantry organized with military precision, everything in its place but nothing that suggested warmth or care. This was a kitchen where a man had survived, not lived. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. By midday, she'd scrubbed every surface until it gleamed, reorganized the pantry so she could actually find things, and discovered that Caleb had been living primarily on salt pork, beans, and stale coffee. The garden behind the house was a tangle of weeds with a few struggling vegetables fighting for survival. Clara was elbow-deep in bread dough when she heard the bell. She looked up, confused, then realized someone was ringing it from outside. She wiped her hands and went to the porch to find Thomas yanking on the bell rope, his face flushed with excitement. "There's a man coming, Mama, on a horse!" Clara's stomach dropped. She scanned the valley and spotted a rider approaching from the south, not Caleb's direction. Her first instinct was to gather the children and hide, but she forced herself to stand tall. The rider drew closer, and Clara recognized him from town. The sheriff. Her heart hammered against her ribs. He dismounted in the yard, touching the brim of his hat. "Mrs. Reed." "Sheriff!" Clara's voice came out steady despite the fear coursing through her. "What brings you out here?" "Just checking on you and the young ones, making sure everything's settled." The way he said it made Clara's skin crawl. "We're fine. Thank you." "That's so?" The sheriff looked around the yard at the children who'd clustered behind Clara. "Must be quite a change from town. Caleb Ward's place is pretty remote. Easy to feel isolated out here. We prefer it to the alternative. Now, Mrs. Reed, I understand you might have felt uncomfortable yesterday, but there were other options. Good men willing to take you in proper-like. Men with standing in the community. Men who wanted to separate my children and use me like property," Clara said flatly. "No, thank you." The sheriff's expression hardened. "Caleb Ward is a strange man, Mrs. Reed. Keeps to himself, doesn't go to church, doesn't socialize. Some folks wonder about a man who lives alone like that for so many years. Some folks should mind their own business. I'm just saying, if things aren't what they seem here, if you need help, you can come to me." Clara understood what he wasn't saying. He was giving her an out, a way to leave. Or perhaps he was testing her, seeing if she'd be easily swayed. Either way, she didn't like it. "Sheriff, I appreciate your concern, but it's misplaced. Mr. Ward has been nothing but generous and respectful. My children are safe, fed, and happier than they've been in months. Whatever you're implying, you're wrong." The sound of hoofbeats made them both turn. Caleb rode into the yard on his bay horse, his expression darkening when he saw the sheriff. "Problem here?" Caleb dismounted with fluid grace, positioning himself between Clara and the lawman. "Just checking on Mrs. Reed and her children," the sheriff said mildly. "Making sure everything's above board." "Everything's fine." Caleb's voice was flat, final. "Unless you have legal business here, I'll ask you to leave." "Now, Caleb, no need to be hostile. I'm just doing my job." "Your job was to stop that auction yesterday. You stood there and watched instead." Caleb's hands clenched at his sides. "So forgive me if I don't trust your sudden concern for Mrs. Reed's welfare." The sheriff's face reddened. "You watch your tone, Ward. I can make things difficult for you." "I'm sure you can, but you'll have to live with yourself after." Caleb stepped closer, and though he didn't raise his voice, there was steel in it. "These people are under my protection now. That means something. You want to question that? You bring a judge and a warrant. Otherwise, stay off my land." The two men stared at each other, and Clara held her breath. Thomas pressed against her side, his small body tense. Finally, the sheriff backed down. He climbed onto his horse, settling his weight. "This isn't over, Ward. People are talking. Questions are being asked." "Let them talk." Caleb crossed his arms. "I've got work to do." The sheriff rode out, and silence fell over the yard. Caleb stood rigid, watching until the lawman disappeared over the ridge. Then his shoulders sagged slightly, and he turned to Clara. "I'm sorry about that." "You don't need to apologize." Clara found she was shaking. "He was trying to intimidate me." "He'll try again. Vernon probably sent him testing to see if you'd crack." Caleb removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. "Small-minded men don't like it when someone upsets their idea of how things should be." "What will they do?" "Talk, mostly. Maybe try to cause trouble. But legally, there's nothing they can do. You're an adult, free to make your own choices, and I paid fair price in front of witnesses." His mouth twisted bitterly. Horrible as that sounds. Clara looked at her children, who were watching with wide, frightened eyes. She knelt down, gathering them close. "It's all right," she murmured. "The sheriff is gone. We're safe." "But what if he comes back?" Margaret whispered. "What if he takes us away?" "He won't." Caleb's voice was firm, certain. He crouched down to the children's level, his expression gentle in a way Clara hadn't seen before. "I made a promise to keep you safe, and I keep my promises. Understand?" Thomas studied Caleb with those two old eyes. "Why do you care what happens to us? You don't even know us." "Don't need to know someone to know they deserve better than what they got." Caleb met the boy's gaze steadily. "Your mama's brave." She stood on that platform and didn't break, even when the whole world was trying to break her. That takes strength. And you stood ready to fight for your family even though you're just a kid. That takes courage. Those things matter more than knowing someone's favorite color or how they take their coffee. Thomas's chin trembled slightly. My pa used to say that. Your pa sounds like he was a good man. He was. The boy's voice cracked. He got sick trying to bring in the harvest, worked himself to death trying to provide for us. Caleb was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was rough. Then we honor him by making sure his sacrifice meant something, by making sure you and your brothers and sisters grow up strong and healthy and free. Claire's throat closed up. She turned away, pressing her hand to her mouth to hold back the sob building in her chest. When was the last time someone had spoken of Jacob with respect? When was the last time anyone had acknowledged that her children had lost their father and deserved grief instead of judgment? Caleb stood, clearing his throat. I'll ride the property line tonight. Make sure nobody's lurking around. Tomorrow I'll teach Thomas where the boundaries are, show him the safe places to explore. You don't have to. I want to. He settled his hat back on. Besides, boy should know his way around the land he's living on. Makes him feel less trapped. He was right. Claire could see it in Thomas's face, the desperate need for control over something, anything, in a life that had spun so wildly out of his grasp. Thank you, she said quietly. Caleb nodded and headed for the barn, his stride purposeful. Clara watched him go, this strange man who'd upended everything and asked for nothing in return. Margaret tugged at her skirt. Mama, I'm hungry. The simple statement jolted Clara back to the present. Of course, sweetheart. Let's see what we can make for lunch. The afternoon passed in domestic rhythms that felt both foreign and familiar. Clara finished her bread, fed the children, settled Ruthie down for a nap. She hung laundry on a line strung between two posts, watching the breeze catch the sheets and make them dance. She weeded a section of the garden, finding satisfaction in the simple act of making order from chaos. The children played until they were exhausted, then sprawled in the shade of the porch. Thomas carved a stick with a pocket knife he'd found, Caleb's, though he'd left it where the boy could discover it like a gift that wasn't a gift. Margaret told stories to the twins, weaving elaborate tales about princesses and dragons. Benjamin fell asleep with his head in his sister's lap. When the sun began its descent toward the mountains, Clara rang the bell. She wasn't sure why she did it. Caleb had said he'd be out riding the property. But something in her wanted to mark the end of the day, to call him home the way Sarah once had. 20 minutes later, he rode into the yard, and Clara's heart did something strange in her chest. Dinner's ready, she called from the porch. If you're hungry. Caleb dismounted, tying his horse to the rail. You didn't have to cook. I know, but I did anyway. Clara wiped her hands on her apron. Nothing fancy, just stew and the bread from this morning. He climbed the porch steps slowly, and Clara noticed he was favoring his left side slightly. When he removed his hat, she saw a cut above his eyebrow, fresh blood making a thin trail down his temple. You're hurt. It's nothing. Branch caught me while I was checking the north fence. Sit down. Clara's voice left no room for argument. She disappeared into the house and returned with a basin of water and clean cloth. This'll sting. Caleb sat in one of the porch chairs, and Clara carefully cleaned the wound. He sat perfectly still, barely breathing, and she became acutely aware of how close they were. She could see the silver threading through his beard, the tiny scar on his chin, the way his jaw tightened when the cloth touched broken skin. You're good at this, he said quietly. 6 children. I've patched up more scrapes and cuts than I can count. Clara rinsed the cloth, noting how the water turned pink. This needs a bandage. I'll be fine. You'll do as you're told. The words came out sharper than she intended, but Caleb's mouth quirked in what might have been amusement. Yes, ma'am. She bandaged the cut with gentle fingers, hyper-aware of his gaze on her face. When she finished, she stepped back quickly, putting safe distance between them. Thank you, Caleb said. It's the least I can do, considering. Considering what? Considering you're out riding your property in the dark because you're worried about my safety. Clara met his eyes. You don't have to do that. I know I don't. He stood, rolling his shoulders. But I will anyway. They looked at each other in the fading light, and Clara felt the weight of everything unspoken between them. Gratitude and wariness, hope and fear, the strange intimacy of two broken people trying to find solid ground. "Dinner's getting cold," she said finally. "Can't have that." Inside, the children had already gathered at the table, eyes bright with hunger. Caleb stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene. The food steaming in bowls, the faces turned toward him expectantly, the warmth and life filling a space that had been cold and empty for so long. "You all right, Mr. Ward?" Thomas asked. Caleb blinked, clearing his throat. "Yeah, just not used to this." "Used to what?" Margaret tilted her head. "Company." They ate together, the silence broken by the twins' chatter and Benjamin's sticky-fingered enthusiasm. Caleb ate slowly, like he was savoring not just the food, but the sound of voices, the presence of people, the simple act of sharing a meal. Clara found herself watching him when she thought he wasn't looking, trying to understand this man who'd disrupted everything. He was careful with the children, patient when Samuel spilled his water, gentle when he helped Benjamin cut his bread. There was a sadness in him so deep it seemed to have settled into his bones, but also a fundamental decency that shone through despite the grief. After dinner, Clara shooed the children upstairs to wash and prepare for bed. Caleb helped clear the table without being asked, and they worked in comfortable silence until the kitchen was clean. "I should go," he said, reaching for his hat. "Let you folks settle in for the night." "Caleb?" Clara's voice stopped him at the door. "Do you ever talk about them, Sarah and Emma?" His hand tightened on the door frame. "Not much point. Talking doesn't bring them back." "No, but it might help you carry them easier." He turned to look at her, and the pain in his eyes was so raw it took her breath away. 8 years, and it still feels like yesterday. How is that possible? Because love doesn't fade just because the people we love are gone. Clara stepped closer. "My husband's been dead 4 months, and sometimes I wake up reaching for him. Sometimes I hear the children laugh and turn to tell him about it, forgetting he's not there. The grief doesn't get smaller. We just get stronger at carrying it." Caleb's jaw worked. "Sarah was pregnant when they got sick. Did I tell you that?" "No." 7 months along. We were going to name the baby Rose if it was a girl, Daniel if it was a boy. His voice cracked. "I lost 3 people that winter, not 2, and I couldn't save any of them." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry. When I saw you on that platform, saw those children clinging to you, for a second I saw Sarah, saw Emma, saw every person I'd failed." He looked at her with haunted eyes. "I couldn't fail again. I couldn't walk away." "You didn't fail them, Caleb. You loved them. You stayed with them. That's not failure." "Feels like it." "I know." Clara wiped her eyes. "But you saved us yesterday. Whatever you think about your past, you gave my children a future. That matters." They stood in the doorway, 2 people bound by loss and unexpected grace, while the last light faded from the sky and stars began to emerge over the mountains. "Get some rest," Caleb said finally. "Tomorrow's another day." He left, and Clara watched him walk to the barn, his silhouette dark against the twilight. She closed the door and leaned against it, overwhelmed by the complexity of what her life had become. Upstairs, she found her children already tucked into beds, eyes drooping. She moved from room to room, kissing foreheads, pulling quilts up to chins, whispering the same words she'd whispered every night since Jacob died. "You're safe. You're loved. Tomorrow will be better." When she finally climbed into bed beside Ruthie, Clara stared at the ceiling and let herself think about Caleb Ward, about the way he'd defended her to the sheriff, about the gentleness in his voice when he spoke to Thomas, about the grief that still consumed him after 8 long years. She understood that grief, carried her own version of it like stones in her pockets. But beneath the grief, she felt something else stirring, something that might have been hope, or possibility, or simply the recognition that survival could become living if you were brave enough to try. Outside, an owl called in the darkness. The creek murmured its endless song, and somewhere in the barn, a lonely man tried to sleep in a room that wasn't home, protecting people who'd become his responsibility through an accident of compassion. Clara closed her eyes and let exhaustion pull her under, dreaming of bread rising and children laughing in gray eyes that held more depth than oceans. The second day dawned bright and clear. Clara was kneading dough when she heard the wagons, 3 of them, rumbling up the valley road in a cloud of dust. She wiped flour from her hands and stepped onto the porch, her stomach knotting with familiar dread. Thomas appeared at her elbow, having learned to materialize whenever trouble approached. "Should I ring the bell?" he asked quietly. "Not yet." Clara shaded her eyes against the morning sun. "Let's see what they want first." But she already knew. The lead wagon belonged to Vernon Reed, and beside him sat his pinch-faced wife. The other 2 wagons carried men Clara recognized from town, members of the church council, shopkeepers, men who fancied themselves upstanding citizens. Caleb emerged from the barn, a hammer still in his hand. He took one look at the approaching wagons, and his expression went cold and hard as winter stone. "Get the children inside, Bet," he said, without taking his eyes off the road. "Lock the doors." "Caleb, do it now, Clara." The tone of his voice sent ice down her spine. She gathered the children quickly, herding them into the house. Margaret started to protest, but Clara's look silenced her. They watched through the windows as the wagons pulled into the yard and Vernon climbed down with exaggerated slowness. "Ward," Vernon called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "We need to talk." "You need to leave my property." Caleb didn't move from where he stood, the hammer loose in his grip. Now, no need for hostility," Vernon gestured to the men behind him. "We're here on official business, church business." "I don't belong to your church." "But Clara does. And her children. We've come to discuss their spiritual welfare." Vernon's smile was oily, triumphant. "Can't have good Christian children living in sin, now can we?" Clara's hands clenched into fists. She moved toward the door, but Thomas grabbed her arm. "Mama, don't! He's trying to bait you." Her son was right, but the rage burning in her chest made it hard to think clearly. Through the window, she watched Caleb's shoulders tense. "There's no sin happening here," Caleb said evenly. "Mrs. Reed and her children have their own rooms. I sleep in the barn. Everything is proper and above board." "Is it?" Vernon tilted his head. "Because folks in town are saying different. Saying it's mighty convenient, you buying yourself a ready-made family. Saying a man doesn't spend $200 on a woman unless he expects certain favors. Folks in town can go to hell." One of the church council members stepped forward, an older man with silver hair and a Bible clutched in his weathered hands. "Mr. Ward, we're not here to cast judgment. We're here out of concern for Mrs. Reed and her innocent children. This arrangement, however well-intentioned, creates an appearance of impropriety." "I don't give a damn about appearances," Caleb said flatly. "But we do. The community does." The man opened his Bible. "Scripture tells us to avoid even the appearance of evil. A widow and a widower living under the same roof without the sanctity of marriage. It's simply not done." Clara couldn't stay silent anymore. She threw open the door and marched onto the porch, fury radiating from every pore. "How dare you?" she said, her voice shaking. "How dare you come here with your Bibles and your judgments after what you did to me, after you stood in that town square and watched me be humiliated and sold like cattle and did nothing." Vernon's wife bristled. "We had nothing to do with that auction. That was your doing, refusing every decent proposal." "Decent?" Clara laughed bitterly. "You call it decent when men offered to take me if I'd abandoned my children, when they looked at my 7-year-old daughter like she was merchandise to be claimed in a few years. That's your definition of decent?" "You're being hysterical," Vernon said dismissively. "We're here to help you, Clara, to save you from making a terrible mistake." "The only mistake I made was trusting family." Clara descended the porch steps, her chin raised. "Caleb Ward has shown me and my children more kindness in 3 days than you showed us in 3 months. He's given us safety, shelter, and dignity, things you stripped from us the moment Jacob died. Kindness that comes with a price, I'm sure." Vernon's eyes glittered with malice. "What happens when Ward tires of playing the hero? What happens when he decides he wants payment for his generosity?" Caleb moved so fast Clara barely saw it. One moment he was standing near the barn, the next he had Vernon by the collar, lifting him onto his toes. "You want to insult me? Fine," Caleb said softly, dangerously. But you speak one more word against Clara, and I'll break your jaw. We clear? Vernon's face went red, then white. The other men surged forward, but Caleb didn't release his grip. We're clear, Vernon choked out. Caleb shoved him backward. Vernon stumbled, catching himself against the wagon wheel. His wife shrieked, and the church council members looked shocked, their righteous certainty shaken by actual confrontation. You all need to understand something, Caleb said, addressing them all. Clara Reed is here by choice. Her children are here by choice. They're free to leave any time they want, but while they're on my land under my protection, you don't get to harass them. You don't get to judge them, and you sure as hell don't get to use your religion as a weapon to make them feel small. This is an outrage, the silver-haired man sputtered. You can't threaten us. That wasn't a threat. That was a promise. Caleb's eyes were like flint. Now get off my property before I forget I'm trying to be civilized. Vernon climbed back onto his wagon, his face mottled with rage and humiliation. This isn't over, Ward. We'll be back with the law. We'll have those children removed from this house of sin. Try it. Caleb's voice cut through Vernon's bluster. Take it to a judge. Present your evidence, but you won't find any, because there isn't any. What you will find is a woman and 6 children living in peace and safety, which is more than they had with you. The wagons pulled out, Vernon's wife shrieking threats and Bible verses in equal measure. Clara stood frozen, watching them disappear over the ridge, her heart hammering so hard she felt dizzy. When the dust settled, Caleb turned to her. You all right? No. Clara's voice came out small. They're going to keep coming, aren't they? They're not going to let this go. Probably not. Then what do we do? Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. There is one solution, one way to make this stop permanently. Clara waited, hardly breathing. We could get married, Caleb said. Make it legal, make it proper in the eyes of the law and the church. Then they'd have no grounds to interfere. The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Clara felt her world tilt sideways. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. Caleb met her eyes steadily. It would be a marriage in name only. Nothing would change between us. You'd still have your rooms, your privacy, your freedom. But on paper, we'd be husband and wife. It would protect you and the children from people like Vernon. Caleb, that's insane. You can't marry someone just to protect them. Why not? I've done crazier things. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. Look, I know it sounds extreme, but think about it practically. If we're married, they can't touch you, can't claim impropriety, can't try to take the children, can't make your life hell every time they feel like it. Clara's mind raced. Marriage. To a man she'd known for 3 days. A man who was still grieving his dead wife, who'd bought her off an auction block, who'd shown her kindness but remained a stranger in all the ways that mattered. I can't ask you to do that, she said quietly. To tie yourself to me and my children out of some sense of duty. You're not asking. I'm offering. Caleb's expression softened slightly. Clara, I'm not looking for romance. I'm not trying to replace Sarah or pretend we have something we don't. I'm just trying to solve a problem, and this solves it. It's too much. You've already given us too much. That's not for you to decide. He stepped closer, and Clara saw the determination in his eyes. I made a choice when I bid on you in that square. I chose to stand between you and the people who wanted to hurt you. This is just continuing that choice. Clara looked back at the house where her children watched through the windows, their faces pressed to the glass. Thomas's expression was unreadable, but she could see the fear in Margaret's eyes, the confusion in the twins' faces. They deserve better than this, she whispered. Better than running, better than constantly looking over their shoulders, better than wondering when the next attack will come. Then give it to them. Say yes. And what about you? What do you get out of this arrangement? Caleb's smile was sad, self-deprecating. A reason to fix up this place. A reason to hear voices in the house instead of ghosts. A reason to keep going instead of just existing. He paused. Maybe that's selfish, but it's honest. Clara studied his face, searching for deception or hidden agendas. She found only weary sincerity and a loneliness so profound it echoed her own. If we do this, she said slowly, It's a partnership, not a rescue. I won't be your charity case or your project. Agreed. And the children come first, always. Their needs, their safety, their happiness, that's the priority. Wouldn't have it any other way. And we're honest with each other. No secrets, no games, no pretending to feel things we don't. Deal. Caleb extended his hand. So is that a yes? Clara looked at his outstretched hand, calloused and scarred from years of hard work. She thought about her children, about the future she wanted to give them, about the strange man offering her a solution wrapped in legal vows and practical protection. She took his hand. Yes. His grip was warm, firm, and when he smiled, really smiled, not the bitter half-expression she'd seen before, it transformed his entire face. We'll go to town tomorrow, he said. Get it done quick and legal, before Vernon can cause more trouble. Tomorrow? Clara's voice squeaked slightly. That's very soon. No point waiting. Every day we delay is another day they can use against us. Caleb released her hand, and Clara felt the absence of his warmth like a physical thing. Besides, the sooner it's done, the sooner you can stop looking over your shoulder. Clara nodded, trying to absorb what she'd just agreed to. Marriage. Again. To a man who wasn't Jacob, could never be Jacob, didn't want to be Jacob. I should tell the children, she said numbly. Want me to come with you? No, I need to do this myself. She walked back to the house on legs that felt disconnected from her body. The children met her at the door, questions tumbling over each other. What did they want, Mama? Are we in trouble? Is Mr. Ward angry? Clara gathered them close, breathing in the scent of sun-warmed skin and innocence. Come sit down. I need to talk to you about something important. They settled in the main room, the younger ones in her lap, the older ones pressed against her sides. Thomas stood slightly apart, his expression guarded. Those men who came today, Clara began carefully, they think it's wrong for us to live here with Mr. Ward. They think it's improper. But we're not doing anything wrong, Margaret protested. I know, sweetheart, but sometimes people see what they want to see, not what's real. Clara took a deep breath. Mr. Ward has offered a solution. He's asked me to marry him. Silence crashed over the room like a wave. Thomas spoke first, his voice tight. You're going to marry him? You barely know him. I know enough. I know he's kind and honest, and he's kept us safe when no one else would. But what about Pa? The pain in Thomas's voice cracked Clara's heart. You loved Pa. I did. I do. Clara pulled him close, even though he resisted. And nothing will ever change that. Your father was a good man, and I'll love him until the day I die. But he's gone, baby. And we need to survive in the world we have, not the one we wish for. So you're just going to replace him? Thomas's eyes filled with angry tears. Never. No one could replace your father. Clara cupped his face in her hands. This isn't about love, Thomas. This is about protection. It's about making sure Vernon can't take you away, can't hurt us anymore. Mr. Ward is offering us safety in the only way that matters legally. Does he want to be our new pa? Benjamin asked, his voice small and uncertain. No, honey, he had his own family once, and he lost them. He's not trying to replace them any more than I'm trying to replace your father. Clara struggled to find the right words. This is an arrangement, a partnership. We help each other, protect each other, but we don't pretend to be something we're not. Margaret chewed her lip. Will he be mean to us? No, sweetheart. I wouldn't marry him if I thought he'd hurt any of you. But what if he changes? Margaret's eyes were too wise, too knowing. What if he's nice now and mean later? Clara's throat tightened. Her daughter had learned too young that people could shift, could show one face and hide another. Vernon had taught them all that lesson. I don't think he will, Clara said honestly. But if he does, if anything changes and you feel unsafe, you tell me immediately. And we'll leave, I promise you that. The twins nodded solemnly, and even baby Ruthie seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. But Thomas pulled away, his face set in stubborn lines. I don't like it, he said flatly. I don't like any of this. You don't have to like it, honey, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Thomas stared at her for a long moment, then nodded once, jerkily. I'll try. It wasn't acceptance, but it was something. Clara held her children and tried not to think about tomorrow, when she'd stand before a judge and pledge herself to a stranger for the second time in her life. That night, after the children were in bed, Clara sat on the porch and watched stars emerge over the mountains. She heard Caleb's footsteps before she saw him, his boots scuffing against wood. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. "It's your porch." "Our porch. As of tomorrow." He settled into the chair beside hers, stretching his legs out. "How'd the children take it?" "About as well as expected. Thomas is angry. Margaret is scared. The little ones don't really understand." "And you?" Clara laughed softly, without humor. "I'm terrified." "Me too." She turned to look at him, surprised by the admission. "You are?" "Haven't been married in 8 years. Haven't shared my life with anyone. Haven't had to consider another person's needs or wants or feelings." Caleb's profile was shadowed in the darkness. "Yeah, I'm terrified." "Then why do it?" "Because being terrified is better than standing by while people get hurt. Because I've spent 8 years hiding from life, and maybe this is a chance to step back into it, even if it's not the way I imagined." He glanced at her. "What about you? Why'd you say yes?" Clara considered the question carefully. "Because my children deserve a childhood. Because I'm tired of being afraid. Because you're offering something I didn't think existed anymore. A choice." "That's all this has to be. A choice we both make, with eyes open." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to night sounds, crickets chirping, wind rustling through aspen leaves, the distant howl of a coyote. Clara felt the strangeness of the moment, how her life had become something she never could have anticipated. "Can I ask you something?" she said quietly. "Anything." "Do you think Sarah would hate this? What we're doing?" Caleb was quiet for so long, Clara thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I think Sarah would want me to be happy. Or if not happy, at least useful. At least living instead of just surviving." He cleared his throat. "She'd probably kick my ass for waiting 8 years to let anyone back in, even if it's just for practical reasons. She sounds like she was wonderful." "She was. And you don't have to pretend otherwise or worry about her ghost hovering between us. Whatever this marriage is, it's not trying to resurrect the past. What is it trying to do? Build a future, or at least make one possible." Caleb stood, reaching for his hat. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." He left, and Clara sat alone with her thoughts until the cold drove her inside. She checked on the children one last time, adjusting blankets and brushing hair from foreheads. When she finally climbed into bed, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering what Jacob would think of all this. She liked to imagine he'd understand, that he'd want his children safe more than he'd want his memory perfectly preserved, that he'd approve of a man who protected his family when no one else would. But she'd never know for certain, and that uncertainty would have to be enough. Morning came too quickly. Clara dressed in her best dress, still the faded blue calico, but freshly washed and pressed. She braided her hair with shaking fingers and descended the stairs to find Caleb already in the kitchen, wearing what must have been his Sunday clothes. Dark trousers, a white shirt, a vest that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. He looked up when she entered, and something flickered in his eyes. "You look nice." "Thank you. So do you." The children ate breakfast in unusual silence, even the twins subdued. Thomas wouldn't look at Caleb, and Clara's heart ached for her son's confusion and pain. The ride to town took 2 hours. Clara sat beside Caleb on the wagon seat, the children arranged in the back under the canvas cover. No one spoke much. The mountains rose around them like sentinels, and Clara tried to memorize the landscape, to anchor herself in something solid while everything else shifted. When Timber Ridge came into view, Clara's stomach clenched. She half expected Vernon to appear, to block their path, to make one final attempt to stop this. But the streets were quiet as they rolled through town. A few people stopped to stare, whispers following in their wake. Caleb ignored them all, pulling the wagon up in front of the courthouse. "Wait here," he told the children. "This won't take long." Inside, the judge was a tired-looking man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers. He looked up from his paperwork, recognized Caleb, and sighed. "Let me guess. You're here about the Reed situation." "We're here to get married," Caleb said evenly. If you'd be willing to perform the ceremony. The judge studied them both, his expression unreadable. You understand this is permanent, legally binding? This isn't something you can undo on a whim. We understand, Clara said. And you're entering into this marriage of your own free will? No coercion? No pressure? My own free will, Clara confirmed. The judge looked at Caleb. You sure about this, Ward? Taking on a widow and 6 children is a hell of a commitment. I'm sure. All right, then. The judge pulled out a ledger and a pen. We'll need 2 witnesses. His clerk and the bailiff served as witnesses, both looking uncomfortable. The ceremony was brief, clinical, stripped of romance or sentiment. Clara repeated vows she'd spoken once before to a man she'd loved desperately. This time the words felt hollow, practical, a legal shield rather than a promise of forever. When it was done, the judge had them sign the marriage certificate. Clara Reed became Clara Ward with a few strokes of a pen, and the binding was complete. Congratulations, the judge said dryly. You're now legally married. I hope you both know what you're doing. So do I, Caleb muttered. They emerged into sunlight, and Clara felt the weight of what they'd just done settle over her shoulders like a mantle. The children scrambled out of the wagon, questions spilling over each other. Are you married now? Is Mr. Ward our pa? What happens next? Caleb knelt down so he was eye level with them. Your mama and I are married now, yes, but I'm not trying to be your pa. You had a pa, and he was a good man. I'm just someone who's going to help take care of you and keep you safe, all right? The children nodded uncertainly. Thomas stood apart, his arms crossed over his chest. Can we go home now? He asked, and the word home hit Clara right in the chest. Home. When had the ranch become home instead of refuge? Yeah, Caleb said quietly. Let's go home. They climbed back into the wagon, and Caleb clicked the horses into motion. As they rolled through town, Clara saw Vernon standing outside the general store, his face purple with rage as he watched them pass. His wife clutched his arm, mouth moving in what Clara imagined were vicious curses. But they couldn't touch her now. She was Clara Ward, legally married, legally protected. Vernon had no claim, no power, no right to interfere in her life. The realization hit her with shocking force. She was free. The freedom lasted exactly 3 weeks. Clara had just finished hanging laundry when she saw the riders coming up the valley road. Not Vernon this time, something worse. The sheriff rode at the head of a group that included the territorial magistrate, a lawyer from Cheyenne, and 2 men Clara didn't recognize, but whose hard eyes and holstered guns marked them as hired muscle. Her hand stilled on the clothespin. The wet sheet snapped in the wind like a surrender flag. Thomas, she called sharply, get your brothers and sisters inside, now. The boy appeared from behind the barn where he'd been stacking firewood with Caleb. He took one look at Clara's face, then at the approaching riders, and ran without argument. Within minutes, all 6 children were herded into the house, Margaret clutching Ruthie while the twins pressed their faces to the window. Caleb emerged from the barn, brushing sawdust from his clothes. He'd been building a proper crib for Ruthie, something he'd worked on in quiet moments when he thought Clara wasn't watching. Now he stood in the yard, his posture deceptively relaxed, but Clara could see the tension in his shoulders. The riders pulled up in a semicircle, boxing them in. The magistrate dismounted first, a portly man with mutton-chop whiskers and an air of self-importance that made Clara's teeth clench. Mr. Ward, Mrs. Ward. He nodded to each of them. I'm Magistrate Howell. This is Attorney Bennett from Cheyenne. We're here on behalf of the Reed family regarding the custody of the 6 minor children currently residing on these premises. Clara felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Custody? What are you talking about? The lawyer stepped forward, pulling papers from his satchel. Vernon Reed has filed a petition with the territorial court claiming he is the children's closest living paternal relative and therefore has legal guardianship rights. He asserts that the children were removed from his care without proper legal process and are currently living in an environment unsuitable for their moral and spiritual development. That's a lie, Clara said, her voice shaking with fury. Vernon sold me and my children like livestock. He has no legal claim. Actually, Mrs. Ward, he does. The lawyer's tone was infuriatingly patient. Under territorial law, in the absence of a living father, Guardianship defaults to the nearest male blood relative unless specifically contested in court. Your marriage to Mr. Ward doesn't automatically transfer parental rights when the children aren't his by blood or legal adoption. Caleb's jaw clenched. Are you saying we need to adopt them? Fine. We'll start the process today. I'm afraid it's not that simple. Magistrate Howell pulled out his own set of documents. Mr. Reed has also filed a complaint alleging that this marriage is fraudulent, contracted solely to circumvent proper custody proceedings. He claims you've created a sham household to maintain control of children you have no legal right to keep. Clara's vision blurred with rage. A sham household? We're legally married. We have a marriage certificate signed by Judge Morrison himself. A marriage certificate obtained 3 days after you arrived at this ranch. A marriage between two virtual strangers who maintain separate sleeping quarters and, according to witness testimony, barely knew each other when the arrangement was made. The magistrate's expression was apologetic but firm. I'm not here to judge the validity of your marriage, Mrs. Ward, but I'm required by law to investigate claims of impropriety when minor children are involved. So what? Caleb's voice was dangerously quiet. You're taking them? Not immediately, but we are issuing a temporary custody order placing the children under the supervision of their Uncle Vernon Reed while the court investigates the circumstances of your marriage and living arrangements. The magistrate gestured to his men. The children will return with us today to stay with the Reed family until a formal hearing can be scheduled. No. The word came from the porch. Everyone turned to see Thomas standing in the doorway, his young face set with determination that looked heartbreaking on someone so small. Behind him, the other children had gathered, their eyes wide with fear. Son, this isn't your decision, the magistrate said gently. I'm not your son, and I'm not going with that man. Thomas descended the steps, his fists clenched at his sides. Uncle Vernon sold my mother. He sold all of us because he wanted the money and didn't want to feed us anymore. He's a liar and a cheat, and I won't let him pretend he cares about us now. Thomas, please. Clara moved toward him, but he stepped away. No, Mama. They need to hear this. Thomas turned to face the magistrate, and Clara saw her son become someone older, harder, forced to grow up in moments instead of years. Mr. Ward bought us because nobody else would keep us together. He gave us a home when everyone else wanted to split us up and send the little ones to orphanages. He's been nothing but good to us. And now you want to take us away and give us to the man who put us on that auction block in the first place? Your uncle has expressed remorse for his actions, Attorney Bennett said smoothly. He claims he was trying to find you a suitable home and made errors in judgment during a difficult time. He's lying, Margaret's voice rang out from the doorway. He told Mama she deserved what she got for thinking she could raise us without a man. His wife said we were burdens and she'd be glad to see us gone. The twins nodded vigorously, and even little Benjamin piped up, his voice trembling. I don't want to go back there. They were mean. Magistrate Howell looked uncomfortable, but his resolve didn't waver. I understand this is difficult, children, but the law requires us to place you with blood relatives while these matters are sorted out. It's for your own protection. Protection from what? Caleb took a step forward, and the hired guns tensed. From having enough to eat? From sleeping in warm beds? From being treated with kindness and respect? From potential exploitation, Mr. Ward? From adults who might be using you as pawns in some scheme we don't yet understand? The magistrate's voice hardened. Now, I've tried to be civil about this, but I have a legal order signed by a territorial judge. Those children are coming with me today, whether you cooperate or not. Clara felt her world cracking apart. She looked at her children clustered on the porch, at Thomas standing defiant in the yard, at Caleb's face going pale beneath his tan. 3 weeks. They'd had 3 weeks of peace, of safety, of something that almost felt like normalcy, and now it was being ripped away. How long? Her voice came out hoarse. How long until the hearing? 6 weeks, possibly 8. These things take time to schedule. The lawyer tucked his papers back into his satchel. You'll be notified of the date and expected to appear before the judge to present your case. 6 weeks? Clara's knees threatened to buckle. You're taking my children for 6 weeks? It's necessary, Mrs. Ward. I'm sorry. Caleb moved to Clara's side, his hand finding hers and gripping tight. There has to be another option. Someone else who can supervise them while this gets sorted out. A neutral party. If you can name a suitable guardian willing to take on 6 children at a moment's notice, I'm willing to consider it. The magistrate spread his hands. But barring that, Mr. Reed is the legal next of kin. Clara's mind raced desperately through every person she knew in the territory. Her own family was back east, hadn't written in years. Jacob's parents were dead. Friends from their old town had scattered after his death, unable or unwilling to help. There was no one. Please. She hated the begging in her voice, hated the helplessness flooding through her. Please don't do this. They're my children. I'm their mother. And you'll have the opportunity to prove that in court. The magistrate nodded to his men. Gather the children's belongings. Be gentle, but be quick. The next 30 minutes were a nightmare Clara would relive for the rest of her life. The children screamed and cried and clung to her as the men tried to separate them. Margaret fought like a wildcat, kicking and biting until one of the men had to physically restrain her. The twins sobbed hysterically, and Benjamin wrapped himself around Clara's legs so tightly they had to pry his fingers loose one by one. Thomas didn't cry. He stood rigid and silent as they packed his few belongings, his eyes fixed on some distant point as if he could will himself somewhere else. When the man reached for his arm, Thomas shook him off. "I'll walk on my own," he said coldly. "Don't touch me." Caleb stood beside Clara, his hand gripping hers so hard her bones ached, but he didn't interfere. Couldn't interfere, not without making things worse. Clara saw the agony in his face, the way his free hand clenched and unclenched like he was fighting every instinct to grab his rifle and end this. "Mama!" Ruthie's wail cut through everything else. The baby reached for Clara with desperate hands as the magistrate lifted her into his arms. "Mama! Mama!" "I'm here, baby. I'm here." Clara's voice broke. "It's going to be okay. Mama's going to fix this. I promise." But her promises felt hollow as dust as she watched the magistrate settle Ruthie on his saddle, watched the other men help her children onto horses, and into the wagon they'd brought for the purpose. Margaret was still fighting, tears streaming down her face. The twins held each other and wailed. Benjamin hiccuped with sobs that shook his small frame. And Thomas looked at Clara with eyes that held betrayal and understanding in equal measure. Eyes that said he'd known this safety couldn't last, that he'd been waiting for the other shoe to drop. And here it was. "Be brave," Clara called to them, her voice barely holding together. "Be strong for each other. I'll get you back. I swear to you, I'll get you back." The riders began to move, and Clara's children disappeared down the valley road in a cloud of dust and broken promises. She stood frozen, Caleb's hand the only thing anchoring her to earth, and watched until they were nothing but specks on the horizon. Then her legs gave out. Caleb caught her before she hit the ground, sweeping her into his arms and carrying her to the porch. He set her in the rocking chair, the same chair where he'd sit sometimes after dinner, watching the sunset, and knelt beside her. "Clara, Clara, breathe." But she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare at the empty road and feel the absence of her children like missing limbs. "They took them," she whispered. "They took my babies. We'll get them back." "You heard what he said. 6 weeks, maybe 8. And if the judge rules against us, if he decides Vernon has a better claim..." Her voice rose to something dangerously close to hysteria. "What if I never get them back?" "That won't happen." "You don't know that." Clara grabbed his shirt, pulling him closer. "You can't promise that. The law doesn't care about what's right. It cares about what's proper, what's legal, and we're neither of those things." Caleb's face was ashen, but his voice remained steady. "Then we make ourselves legal. We make this marriage real in every way that matters. We prove to that judge that we're a family, that this isn't a sham, that those children belong with us." Clara stared at him. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we stop pretending this is just an arrangement. We share a name, we share a home, we share everything except a bed, and that's the only thing they can use against us." He took her face in his hands, his gray eyes intense. "If we want to win this fight, we have to give them nothing to question. We have to be exactly what we claim to be, a married couple providing a stable, proper home. But we're not. We don't." Clara's mind spun. "Caleb, you can't possibly want..." What I want doesn't matter. What matters is getting those children back. His thumb brushed away a tear on her cheek. I told you once I couldn't fail again. I meant it. Whatever it takes to bring them home, I'll do it. The question is whether you will too. Clara looked into his face and saw the same desperation she felt, the same determination. 3 weeks ago, she'd married this man as a legal shield. Now he was asking her to make it real, to bridge the careful distance they'd maintained, to risk everything on the chance that proximity might become something more. If we do this, she said slowly, there's no going back. We can't unmake that choice. I know. And if it doesn't work? If the judge still rules against us? Then at least we'll know we tried everything. Caleb's hands slipped from her face, but he stayed kneeling before her. I'm not asking you to love me, Clara. I'm not even asking you to want this. I'm asking you to fight for your children with every weapon we have. And right now, this is the best weapon I can offer. Clara closed her eyes, thinking of Ruthie's terrified wails, of Margaret's fierce resistance, of Thomas's betrayed expression. Thinking of 6 weeks of them being subjected to Vernon's cruelty, his wife's vindictiveness, the slow erosion of the safety and peace they'd just begun to trust. All right, she whispered, whatever it takes. She opened her eyes to find Caleb watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Relief, maybe, mixed with something deeper and more complicated. We start tonight, he said, rising to his feet. I'll move my things from the barn to the house, to our room. The word sent a jolt through her. Our room. The bedroom she'd been sleeping in, the space she'd claimed as her own sanctuary. Now it would become shared territory, intimate space with a man who was still fundamentally a stranger, despite the ring on her finger. Caleb, I'll take the floor. I won't. He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. I won't ask anything of you except your presence. But if the magistrate sends someone to check on us, they need to see a real marriage. Understand? Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. The day passed in a haze of grief and preparation. Clara moved through the house like a ghost, straightening the children's abandoned toys, smoothing blankets they'd left rumpled, touching objects they'd touched, as if she could summon them back through sheer will. Caleb worked with grim efficiency, carrying his few belongings from the barn to the house, setting up a pallet on the floor beside the bed, reorganizing the space to accommodate 2 people instead of 1. When night fell, Clara stood in the bedroom doorway and looked at the changed landscape. Caleb's clothes hung beside hers in the wardrobe. His boots sat next to her shoes by the door. His shaving kit occupied space on the washstand. The room that had been hers alone now bore the unmistakable markers of masculine presence. I know this is strange, Caleb said quietly from where he sat on the floor, pulling off his boots. But we'll manage. Clara nodded and moved to the bed, sitting on the edge to remove her own shoes with trembling fingers. The silence between them was thick, weighted with everything they weren't saying. She changed into her nightgown behind the dressing screen with acute awareness of Caleb's presence just feet away. When she emerged, he was already lying on his pallet, staring at the ceiling with his hands folded on his chest. Clara climbed into bed and blew out the lamp, plunging them into darkness broken only by moonlight through the window. She lay rigid, listening to Caleb breathe, listening to the emptiness of the house without her children's sounds, listening to her own heartbeat and wondering how everything had gone so wrong so fast. Clara? Caleb's voice drifted up from the floor. Yes? We're going to win this, I promise you that. Don't make promises you can't keep. I don't. Rustling sounds as he shifted position. Tomorrow, I'm writing to Cheyenne to find us a lawyer. A good one. Someone who knows territorial law and isn't afraid to fight dirty if necessary. And I'm going to visit every person I can think of who might testify on our behalf. We don't know anyone. We've been here 3 weeks. I know people. Ranchers I've traded with, men I've worked alongside, the doctor who treated me when I broke my arm 2 years back. Someone will speak for us. His voice held grim determination. And while I'm gone, you're going to write down everything. Every kindness you showed those children, every meal you cooked, every story you told, everything Vernon did wrong, every cruelty, every moment that proves he's unfit. We're going to bury them in evidence. Clara stared at the ceiling and felt something kindle in her chest. Not hope, not yet, but the possibility of hope. The sense that maybe, just maybe, they weren't completely powerless. Caleb? Yeah? Thank you for this, for all of it. Don't thank me yet. Wait until we win. Clara woke before dawn to find Caleb already dressed and moving quietly around the room. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept at all, but his movements were purposeful. I'm leaving now, he said when he noticed her watching. Should be back in 4, maybe 5 days. You'll be all right here alone? I've been alone before. There's a rifle in the kitchen. You know how to use it? Jacob taught me. Good. Anyone comes around giving you trouble, you fire a warning shot. Sound carries. The neighbors will hear. He paused at the door. And Clara? Don't let anyone in except Doc Miller or Sheriff Matthews if there's an emergency. Nobody else. Clear? Clear. He left and Clara listened to his horse gallop out of the yard. Then she rose, dressed, and went downstairs to the empty kitchen. She made coffee with mechanical precision, sat at the table that felt too large without her children crowding around it, and pulled out paper and pen. Then she began to write. She wrote about the auction, about Vernon's casual cruelty, and his wife's vicious pleasure in Clara's humiliation. She wrote about the terror of not knowing what would happen to her children, about Thomas's fierce protectiveness and Margaret's desperate courage. She wrote about Caleb stepping forward when no one else would, about the first meal they'd shared, about watching her children laugh and play without fear for the first time in months. She wrote until her hand cramped, until the words blurred on the page, until she documented every detail she could remember. And when she finally set down the pen, she felt drained but focused. Vernon wanted a fight. He'd get one. The next 4 days passed with agonizing slowness. Clara cleaned obsessively, keeping her hands busy to quiet her mind. She weeded the entire garden, scrubbed every floor, organized every cupboard. She wrote more, adding details as they occurred to her, building a narrative that would prove her fitness as a mother and Vernon's unfitness as a guardian. At night, she lay in bed and listened to the silence. The house felt wrong without children's breathing, without midnight whimpers and whispered conversations. She'd grown so accustomed to their presence that their absence was a physical ache. On the 5th day, she heard hoofbeats and ran to the window, heart leaping with hope. But it wasn't Caleb returning, it was a single rider moving slowly up the valley road. Clara grabbed the rifle and stepped onto the porch, holding the weapon with steady hands. The rider drew closer, and she recognized the doctor from town, an older man with kind eyes and a reputation for discretion. Mrs. Ward, he called, raising his hands to show they were empty. I come in peace. May I approach? What do you want, Doc? To check on you, and to bring news. He dismounted carefully, keeping his movements slow and unthreatening. Your husband hired me to monitor the children while they're with the Reeds. Make sure they're being properly cared for. Clara's breath caught. You've seen them? Are they all right? Physically, yes. They're being fed, housed, kept clean. Doc Miller's expression turned grim. But they're miserable, Mrs. Ward. The little ones cry constantly. The older boy refuses to speak to anyone. And I've seen bruises on young Margaret that Mrs. Reed claims came from the girl fighting her attempts to teach proper behavior. Rage flooded through Clara so fierce she nearly pulled the trigger on pure instinct. She's hitting my daughter? Nothing I can prove as abuse, unfortunately. Just discipline that walks the line of what's acceptable. He climbed the porch steps and Clara led him. But I wanted you to know I'm documenting everything. Every visit, every observation, every concern. It'll be in my testimony at the hearing. Clara's eyes burned. Thank you. Thank your husband. He's the one paying me to make weekly visits. Doc Miller pulled an envelope from his coat. He also asked me to give you this. Said it was important. Clara took the letter with shaking hands. Inside, in Caleb's careful script, was a brief message and a name. Clara. Found us a lawyer. Augustus Morrison, Judge Morrison's nephew. He's smart, ruthless, and owes me a favor from years back. He'll fight for us. I'll be home tomorrow with a strategy. Stay strong. The children need you whole when we get them back. C. Below the message was a list of names. Witnesses Caleb had secured. ranchers who'd speak to his character, shopkeepers who'd seen him interact with the children in town, the pastor from the church he'd stopped attending years ago, but who remembered him as decent and honest. 8 names total, each one a small piece of armor for the battle ahead. Clara pressed the letter to her chest and let herself cry for the first time since the children had been taken. Not from despair this time, but from something that felt dangerously like hope. "Your husband's a good man," Doc Miller said quietly. "Stubborn as hell, private to a fault, but good. He'll move mountains to bring those children home." "I know." Clara wiped her eyes. "I'm counting on it." When Caleb returned the next day, Clara met him in the yard. He looked haggard, dust-covered, pushed to his limits, but his eyes held fierce determination. "We've got a chance," he said, dismounting. "Morrison says the case is winnable if we play it right, if we present a united front and give the judge no reason to doubt us." "Then that's what we'll do." Clara helped him unsaddle his horse, working in tandem with the ease of people who'd learned each other's rhythms. "Whatever it takes." That night, they sat at the kitchen table and planned their strategy like generals preparing for war. Augustus Morrison would argue their case based on the children's well-being and Clara's maternal rights. They would present testimonies painting Caleb as a stable, responsible provider and Clara as a devoted mother. They would document every one of Vernon's failures and cruelties, and they would pray it would be enough. The courthouse was packed when Clara and Caleb arrived on the morning of the hearing. Word had spread through the territory, and it seemed like half of Timber Ridge had come to watch the spectacle. Clara felt their eyes on her like brands as she walked up the steps, her hand tucked into the crook of Caleb's arm. She dressed carefully in a navy dress that Margaret had helped her alter weeks ago. The memory of her daughter's nimble fingers working the needle made Clara's throat close. Her hair was pinned in a simple bun, and she wore the only piece of jewelry she owned, a cameo brooch that had belonged to Jacob's mother. Caleb wore his Sunday best, freshly pressed, his beard trimmed close. He looked solid and dependable, exactly the kind of man a judge might trust with a family. But Clara could feel the tension radiating from him, the barely controlled fury that simmered beneath his calm exterior. Inside the courtroom, Vernon sat at the plaintiff's table with his lawyer, a slick-looking man from Cheyenne with calculating eyes. Vernon's wife sat in the front row, her mouth set in a thin line of righteous satisfaction. When their eyes met, Clara didn't look away. She held that hateful gaze until the other woman flinched and turned aside. Augustus Morrison stood as they approached the defense table. He was younger than Clara had expected, maybe 35, with sharp features and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. He'd spent the past 6 weeks building their case with the methodical precision of a master craftsman. "Remember what we discussed," Morrison said quietly as they sat. "Let me do the talking unless the judge addresses you directly. Answer honestly and simply. Don't let them provoke you into anger." Clara nodded, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap her knuckles went white. Caleb's hand covered hers beneath the table, warm and steady. The bailiff called the court to order and Judge Whitaker entered, a severe-looking man in his 60s with iron-gray hair and eyes like chips of granite. He settled into his chair and surveyed the courtroom with evident distaste. "This is a custody hearing regarding 6 minor children," he said, his voice carrying easily through the packed room. "I want it understood from the outset that I will tolerate no theatrics, no emotional outbursts, and no attempts to turn my courtroom into a circus. The only thing that matters here is the welfare of those children. Is that clear?" A murmur of assent rippled through the crowd. "Good. Mr. Bennett, you may present your opening statement." Vernon's lawyer stood, buttoning his jacket with practiced ease. "Your Honor, this case is quite simple. My client, Vernon Reed, is the paternal uncle of 6 children who were placed in his care following the untimely death of their father, Jacob Reed. While acting in good faith to secure the children's future, Mr. Reed arranged for their mother, Clara Reed, to find suitable remarriage." Clara's jaw clenched at the sanitized version of events, but Morrison's hand on her arm kept her silent. "Unfortunately," Bennett continued, "Mrs. Reed formed an attachment to a man of questionable character, Caleb Ward, a recluse known for his isolation and lack of social connections. Within 3 days of arriving at Mr. Ward's remote ranch, Mrs. Reed married him in what we believe was a calculated attempt to circumvent proper custody proceedings. We contend that this marriage is fraudulent, contracted solely to maintain control of children that legally belong under Mr. Reed's guardianship as the closest male blood relative. Bennett paused for effect, letting his words settle over the courtroom like a blanket. Furthermore, we have evidence that Mr. Ward and Mrs. Reed maintain separate sleeping quarters and have no genuine marital relationship, that the living conditions on the ranch are unsuitable for young children, and that Mrs. Reed has demonstrated poor judgment in aligning herself with a man she barely knew. We ask the court to grant permanent custody to Mr. Reed, who can provide stability, community support, and proper moral guidance. He sat down, and Clara felt the weight of every eye in the room. She wanted to scream, to tear apart every lie Bennett had just told, but Morrison was already rising. "Your Honor," Morrison's voice was calm, measured, but it carried an edge of steel. "What Mr. Bennett has just presented is a masterwork of fiction disguised as fact. The truth is far less flattering to his client and far more damning." He began to pace, his movements calculated to draw attention. Vernon Reed did not arrange for his sister-in-law to find remarriage. He placed her on an auction block in the town square and sold her, along with her 6 children, to the highest bidder like livestock at a county fair. Multiple witnesses will testify to this fact, including the auctioneer himself and several townspeople who were horrified by what they witnessed. A ripple of shock went through the courtroom. Judge Whitaker's expression darkened. "Mr. Ward did indeed bid on and purchase Mrs. Reed and her children," Morrison continued, "but not from any nefarious purpose. He did so because he could not stand by and watch a widow and her children be separated and sold to men who viewed them as property rather than people. He provided them with shelter, safety, and dignity when no one else would." Morrison turned to face Vernon directly. "As for the marriage being fraudulent, we will present evidence that proves quite the opposite. Mr. Ward and Mrs. Reed have built a genuine partnership based on mutual respect, shared responsibility, and a commitment to providing those children with the stable, loving home they deserve. The fact that they married quickly doesn't make their union any less valid in the eyes of the law or in moral terms." He returned to the table and picked up a stack of papers. "We have 8 witnesses prepared to testify to Mr. Ward's character, his fitness as a guardian, and the quality of care he and Mrs. Reed have provided. We have medical documentation from Dr. Miller regarding the children's health and well-being, both before and after being placed with Mr. Reed. And we have testimony from the children themselves, if the court wishes to hear it." Judge Whitaker leaned forward. "You're proposing to put children as young as 3 on the stand?" "Only if necessary, Your Honor. We believe the other evidence will speak for itself. But if the court has doubts, the children are old enough to express their preferences and experiences." "We'll see." The judge made a note. "Mr. Bennett, call your first witness." The next 2 hours were brutal. Bennett called witness after witness, each one painting a picture of Caleb as an antisocial recluse and Clara as a desperate woman making poor choices. The sheriff testified about receiving complaints regarding the improper living arrangement. The church council members described their concerns about the children's spiritual welfare. Vernon's wife wept on the stand as she described her heartbreak at having the children torn from her care. Through it all, Clara sat rigid, her hand gripping Caleb's beneath the table. She watched Morrison take notes, watched him occasionally object to leading questions or speculation presented as fact. He was letting them build their case, she realized, letting them commit to their version of events before he tore it apart. When it was finally Morrison's turn, he stood with the bearing of a man holding all the cards. "I'd like to call Dr. Samuel Miller to the stand." The doctor took his oath and settled into the witness chair with the calm authority of a man whose profession commanded respect. "Dr. Miller, you've been treating the Reed children for how long?" "Since they arrived in Timber Ridge 4 months ago. I treated them initially when they were living with Vernon Reed, and I've continued to monitor them per Mr. Ward's request." "And what were your observations when you first examined them?" Doc Miller pulled out his medical journal. "All 6 children showed signs of malnutrition, not severe, but notable. They were underweight for their ages, particularly the younger ones. The oldest boy, Thomas, had an improperly set finger that had been broken weeks earlier but never treated. Margaret had a persistent cough that had gone untended. The general picture was of children whose basic needs were being barely met. And after they went to live with Mr. Ward and Mrs. Reed, remarkable improvement. Within 2 weeks, All 6 had gained healthy weight. The cough resolved with proper care. Even the baby, who had been listless and colicky, became more active and alert. Doc Miller looked directly at the judge. "I've been practicing medicine for 30 years, Your Honor. I know the difference between children who are merely surviving and children who are thriving. Under Mr. and Mrs. Ward's care, those children were thriving." "And when they were returned to Vernon Reed's custody 6 weeks ago?" The doctor's expression hardened. "I visited weekly as contracted. The children have lost weight again. They're withdrawn, anxious. Margaret has bruises that Mrs. Reed claims come from discipline, but the pattern is consistent with excessive force. Thomas refuses to eat unless forced. The younger ones cry constantly. It's textbook trauma response." Bennett jumped to his feet. "Objection! The witness is speculating about psychological states he's not qualified to assess." "Sustained," Judge Whitaker said. "Stick to medical observations, Doctor." "Yes, Your Honor." Doc Miller leaned forward. "Medically speaking, those children's physical and emotional health has deteriorated significantly in the 6 weeks they've been with Vernon Reed. That's not speculation. That's clinical observation." Morrison nodded. "Thank you, Doctor. No further questions." Bennett's cross-examination was aggressive but ineffective. Doc Miller held firm to his observations, his credibility unshakable. When he stepped down, Clara felt the first flutter of real hope. Morrison called witness after witness. The ranch hands who'd helped Caleb over the years testified to his fair dealing and good character. The shopkeeper from town described watching Caleb patiently help Thomas pick out shoes, his gentleness with the boy evident. The pastor spoke of knowing Caleb before tragedy struck, describing him as a man of integrity who'd withdrawn from society out of grief, not malice. Then Morrison called Clara to the stand. She walked on shaking legs, her heart hammering as she placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. Caleb's eyes followed her, steady and encouraging. "Mrs. Ward," Morrison began gently, "tell the court about the day of the auction." Clara took a breath and began. She described Vernon's deception, the horror of standing on that platform, the degradation of being bid on like property. She told them about the men who wanted to separate her children, about Thomas's fury and fear, about holding Ruthie while strangers debated her worth in dollars and cents. "And when Mr. Ward bid on you?" "I was terrified," Clara said honestly. "I didn't know him, didn't know what he wanted or what he'd demand in return for his money, but he outbid everyone, and he didn't look at me the way the others had. He looked angry, like what was happening was an offense to everything decent." "What happened when you arrived at his ranch?" "He gave us his house, all of it. He moved to the barn and told me we were free to do as we pleased, stay, leave, whatever we needed. He didn't demand anything, didn't expect anything. He just gave us space to breathe." "And the marriage? Mr. Bennett claims it was fraudulent." Clara looked directly at Vernon, then at the judge. "We married to protect my children from people who saw them as pawns and commodities. Was it practical?" "Yes." "Was it rushed?" "Absolutely." "But fraudulent?" "No. Caleb Ward has been more of a husband to me in 8 weeks than some men are in decades. He's protected us, provided for us, stood between us and everyone who wanted to hurt us. That's not fraud. That's marriage." Bennett stood for cross-examination, his smile predatory. "Mrs. Ward, you claim this marriage is genuine. Yet you and Mr. Ward maintain separate bedrooms, do you not?" "We did," Clara said carefully. "For the first 3 weeks, while we were learning to trust each other. And now?" "Now we share a room, as married couples do." Bennett's eyebrows rose. "How convenient. This change occurred when, exactly?" "The day our children were taken from us." Clara's voice hardened. "The day we realized we needed to present a united front against people who would use technicalities and appearances to justify cruelty." "So you admit the change was strategic, not organic?" "I admit we adapted our living arrangements to meet the court's expectations of propriety, but that doesn't make our partnership any less real." Bennett paced, clearly trying to rattle her. "Mrs. Ward, you married Jacob Reed when you were 19. By all accounts, that was a love match. Are you truly asking this court to believe you've developed similar feelings for a man you've known mere weeks?" Clara met his eyes steadily. No one could replace Jacob. Caleb isn't trying to. What we have is different. It's built on respect, on shared purpose, on genuine care for each other's well-being and for my children's future. Maybe that's not the romance novels talk about, but it's real, and it's enough. When she stepped down, Clara felt drained but resolute. Caleb caught her hand as she passed, squeezing gently, and she drew strength from that simple touch. Morrison called his final witness. The defense calls Caleb Ward. Caleb took the stand with the same quiet composure he brought to everything. He answered Morrison's questions simply, without embellishment. He described finding Clara on that platform, his decision to bid, his reasons for offering marriage. "Mr. Ward," Morrison said, "do you love Mrs. Ward?" The question hung in the air. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, and Clara held her breath. "I respect her," he said finally. "I admire her courage and her devotion to her children. I care about her well-being and want to see her happy. Is that love? I don't know. I'm still learning what that word means again after thinking I'd lost it forever. But what I feel for Clara is real, and it's growing stronger every day." Clara's eyes burned. It was the most honest answer he could have given, and somehow more powerful than any declaration of passionate love would have been. Bennett's cross-examination was sharp, focused on Caleb's isolation and his lack of social connections. But Caleb didn't waver. "You live 15 miles from town, Mr. Ward. How can you provide proper social development for 6 growing children?" "The same way countless ranch families do. We'll make trips to town for school and church once the children are back. We'll visit neighbors, participate in community events. Living rurally doesn't mean living in isolation." "But you've been isolated for 8 years." "I was grieving. I'm not anymore." Caleb's voice was firm. "Those children brought life back to my home and purpose back to my days. I won't let them suffer for my past mistakes." When both sides had rested, Judge Whitaker called a recess to deliberate. Clara and Caleb sat in a small room off the courthouse, and neither speaking, both lost in their own thoughts. "Whatever happens," Clara began. "We're getting them back," Caleb interrupted. "We have to." 2 hours later, they were called back to the courtroom. The judge looked grave as he surveyed the packed room, then focused on the parties before him. "I've listened carefully to all the testimony presented today," he began. "This case has forced me to weigh multiple considerations: the letter of the law against the spirit of justice, blood ties against demonstrated care, tradition against what is clearly in these children's best interest." Clara's nails dug into Caleb's palm. "Mr. Reed, you are indeed the children's closest paternal relative. That gives you a legitimate claim under territorial law. However, the manner in which you exercise that claim, by placing your sister-in-law and her children on an auction block, demonstrates a fundamental failure to prioritize their well-being over your own convenience and profit." Vernon's face went red. His lawyer whispered urgently in his ear. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "the medical evidence shows clearly that the children's health and welfare improved dramatically under Mr. and Mrs. Ward's care, and has deteriorated just as dramatically in your custody. The court cannot ignore such objective proof." Judge Whitaker turned to Clara and Caleb. "Mr. and Mrs. Ward, your marriage may have begun as a practical arrangement, but the evidence suggests it has evolved into something more substantial. More importantly, you have demonstrated genuine commitment to these children's welfare. You have provided them with stability, care, and protection when no one else would." He picked up his gavel. "After careful consideration, I am ruling in favor of Mr. and Mrs. Ward. Full legal custody of all 6 children is hereby granted to them, with termination of any guardianship claims by Vernon Reed. Furthermore, I am ordering Mr. Reed to reimburse Mr. Ward the $200 he paid at that auction, as the transaction was improper from the start." The gavel fell, and the courtroom erupted. Clara couldn't breathe, couldn't process what she'd just heard. Caleb's arm came around her shoulders, solid and real, and she turned into his chest and sobbed. Vernon was shouting, his lawyer frantically trying to calm him. His wife shrieked about injustice and impropriety. But the judge was already standing, his decision final. Morrison gripped Clara's shoulder. "The children are being brought over now. They were waiting in the church across the street." Clara broke away from Caleb and ran from the courtroom, down the steps, across the dusty street. And there they were. 6 beloved faces, 6 pairs of arms reaching for her. She dropped to her knees and they swarmed her, crying her name, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "Mama, Mama, we missed you. I knew you'd come. I was so scared." Clara tried to hold them all at once, kissing foreheads and wiping tears, her own sobs mixing with theirs. Thomas stood slightly apart, his face working as he fought to maintain control. Clara held out an arm to him. "Come here, baby." He crashed into her, and the floodgates opened. 9 years old and trying so hard to be strong, finally allowed to be a child again. Caleb approached slowly, giving them space, but Margaret broke free and ran to him, throwing her arms around his waist. "You brought us home," she said fiercely. "I knew you would." Caleb's hand settled on her head, gentle. "Always. I'll always bring you home." One by one, the other children gravitated to him until he was surrounded, part of the circle instead of outside it. And Clara looked at this man who'd bought her freedom and given her back her family, and felt something shift irrevocably in her chest. The ride back to the ranch was chaos, children talking over each other, sharing stories of their time with Vernon that made Clara's blood boil and her heart ache. The twins sat on Caleb's lap on the wagon seat, chattering like magpies. Thomas rode his horse alongside them, his shoulders finally relaxing. Even baby Ruthie seemed to sense that everything had changed, that they were safe now, truly safe. When the ranch came into view, Margaret leaned forward and sighed. "We're home. Home." The word resonated through Clara like a bell. That night, after the children were bathed and fed and tucked into their beds with extra kisses and reassurances, Clara and Caleb stood on the porch and watched the sun set over the mountains. "Thank you," Clara said quietly, "for everything, for fighting for them, for fighting for us, for never giving up. You don't need to thank me for doing what was right." Caleb's profile was peaceful in the golden light. "Those kids, they saved me as much as I saved them. Maybe more. Still, what you did, what you've done, I can never repay that. I don't want repayment, Clara." He turned to look at her, and something in his eyes made her breath catch. I want this to be real, not just legally, not just on paper, but actually real. I want to wake up in the morning and know you're beside me. I want to raise those children together, as partners. I want to build a life that's not just about surviving, but about living. Clara's heart raced. "Caleb, I know this isn't what you planned. I know you love Jacob, and maybe part of you always will. I'm not asking you to feel something you don't." He took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "But I'm asking you to give us a chance, to see if what we've built can become something more." Clara looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. She saw hope there, and fear, and a vulnerability he'd kept hidden beneath layers of grief and isolation. She thought about the past weeks, about how seamlessly they'd learned to work together, about the comfort she found in his presence, about the way her children had come to trust and care for him. She thought about the moment in the courtroom when he'd said his feelings were real and growing stronger, about the countless small kindnesses he'd shown, the quiet strength he'd offered, the way he'd stood between her family and everyone who wanted to hurt them. And she realized that somewhere along the way, without noticing exactly when, her own feelings had shifted too. What had started as gratitude had become respect, and respect had become trust, and trust had become something deeper and warmer that she wasn't quite ready to name, but couldn't deny. "I'd like that," she said softly. "I'd like to try." Caleb's smile was slow and genuine, transforming his face. "Yeah?" "Yeah." Clara stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "I can't promise it'll be easy. I can't promise I won't wake up some morning still grieving for what I lost. But I can promise to try. To give us, a real chance. That's all I'm asking." He reached up, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "We'll figure it out as we go. Together." "Together," Clara echoed. They stood there as twilight deepened into night, not quite embracing but not apart either, finding their balance on the edge of something new. Inside the house, they could hear the children settling into sleep, their voices a gentle murmur of contentment and safety. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Clara woke to find Caleb already up, and when she came downstairs, she found him teaching Thomas how to make pancakes, while Margaret set the table and the younger children played on the floor. Mama! Benjamin ran to her, throwing his arms around her legs. Mr. Ward's making breakfast. Caleb, Thomas corrected gently, glancing at the man beside him. He said we could call him Caleb if we want. Caleb met Clara's eyes over the boy's head, questioning. She smiled and nodded. Let the children find their own way to define this relationship, just as she and Caleb were finding theirs. Breakfast was loud and joyful, sticky with syrup and rich with laughter. Afterward, Caleb announced he had a surprise and led them all to the barn. There, in a corner he'd screened off with fresh lumber, was the crib he'd been building, now finished and polished, with intricate carvings of mountains and trees along the headboard. For Ruthie, he said, lifting the baby into it to check the fit. Figured she'd outgrown sleeping with your mama. Ruthie giggled and grabbed at the carved mountains, and Clara felt tears prick her eyes. This man who claimed to be broken had so much tenderness to give. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt almost miraculous in its normalcy. The children resumed their routines, exploring the ranch with newfound freedom now that they knew it was permanent. Thomas began following Caleb around, soaking up knowledge about ranching and livestock. Margaret helped Clara in the kitchen and garden, her natural nurturing instincts finding expression in caring for the younger ones. And Clara and Caleb learned each other, learned how he took his coffee black and strong, how she hummed while she worked, learned that he woke before dawn regardless of the season, that she needed quiet mornings to gather her thoughts, learned to communicate in glances and touches, in the comfortable silence of two people who didn't need constant words to understand each other. 3 months after the trial, on a Sunday morning, Caleb found Clara in the garden pulling weeds. He knelt beside her, his hands working the soil. Been thinking, he said after a while. That's dangerous, Clara teased. He smiled. Been thinking we should expand the house. Add another room or two. The children are growing and they'll need more space. That's a good idea. Clara sat back on her heels. Margaret's getting to an age where she needs privacy. And there might be more someday. Children, I mean. Caleb's ears went red, but he held her gaze. If you wanted, no pressure, just keeping options open. Clara's breath caught. More children. With Caleb. The idea sent a flutter through her chest that was equal parts terror and longing. I'd like that, she said quietly. Someday? When we're ready? Yeah, someday. He reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch lingering. Clara? I love you. The words were simple, unadorned, but they landed with the weight of truth. Clara looked at this man who'd come into her life under the worst possible circumstances and become her anchor, her partner, her home. I love you too, she said, and discovered she meant it completely. Caleb leaned in and kissed her, gentle and sweet, right there in the garden with dirt under their nails, and the children's laughter drifting from the creek. It wasn't the passionate romance of her first marriage, but it was real and solid and right. When they finally pulled apart, Clara rested her forehead against his. How did we get here? From that auction block to this? One day at a time, one choice at a time. Caleb's hand cupped her face. You chose to trust me. I chose to deserve that trust. And we kept choosing each other over and over until it became who we are. Mr. Ward! Mrs. Ward! Margaret's voice called from the house. The twins are trying to feed the chickens cookies again. Clara laughed, the sound free and genuine. We should probably stop that. Probably. But Caleb stole one more kiss before standing and pulling her to her feet. They walked back to the house hand in hand toward the chaos and joy and beautiful messiness of their chosen family. Behind them, the garden waited patiently for attention. Above them, mountains stood eternal and unchanging. And ahead of them stretched a future that looked nothing like either of them had planned, but was somehow exactly what they both needed. That evening, as Clara tucked the children into bed, Thomas caught her hand. Mama, are you happy? Clara thought about the question, about the winding path that had led her here, about loss and fear and the unexpected grace of second chances, about a man who'd bought her freedom and won her heart through simple, steadfast presence. Yes, baby, I am. Good. Thomas snuggled deeper into his blankets. Because you deserve to be happy. And Caleb's good for you. For all of us. He is, isn't he? Clara kissed his forehead. Sleep tight, sweetheart. She moved through the house, checking locks and banking fires, before heading upstairs to the bedroom she now shared without hesitation. Caleb was already there, reading by lamplight, and he looked up when she entered. All settled? All settled. Clara changed into her nightgown and slipped into bed beside him, fitting herself against his side with the ease of long practice. Caleb set aside his book and wrapped his arm around her shoulders. What are you thinking about? How far we've come. How different everything is from what I imagined. Clara traced idle patterns on his chest. How grateful I am that you were in that town square that day. Best $200 I ever spent. She swatted him. That's terrible. But true. He caught her hand and kissed her palm. Though I'd do it for free now. Buy you 1,000 times over just to have this. You already have this. You already have us. Clara tilted her face up to his. We're yours, Caleb Ward, completely and permanently. And I'm yours. He kissed her forehead, her nose, her lips. However this happened, whatever strange path brought us together, I wouldn't change a moment of it. They settled into sleep wrapped around each other, while outside the wind whispered through the aspens and the creek sang its endless song. The house that had stood empty and grieving for 8 years now brimmed with life and laughter and love hard won. And in the morning, they would wake and do it all again. Raise children, work the land, build the life they'd chosen against all odds. Together, exactly as they'd promised, exactly as they'd fought to become. The woman who'd stood on that auction block refusing to break had found her dignity again. The man who'd lived in isolation had found his purpose. And the children who'd been treated as commodities had found a home where they were treasured. It wasn't the fairy tale Clara had dreamed of as a girl. It was better. It was real. And it was theirs.